Welcome to Cheater Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. 15 years of marriage had made me believe I knew Laura better than anyone. That's why I didn't think much of it when she called me that Tuesday afternoon and asked me to meet her for dinner instead of going straight home. "Just you and me," she said. Her voice sounded off, but I figured maybe she wanted to talk about Sarah's upcoming birthday or some issue at school. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early. Laura was already there. That alone was unusual. She was normally late. She sat at a corner table staring into a glass of water. No smile, no greeting, no small talk. The moment I sat down, I knew something was wrong. "You look like you're waiting for a funeral," I said. She forced a weak smile. "It's serious." The waiter came, took our orders, and left. The food arrived a few minutes later. Laura barely touched it. She kept looking around the room as if she wanted to be somewhere else. I folded my hands on the table. "All right, what's going on?" For a few seconds, she just stared at the tablecloth. Then she looked up. Her eyes were red. "Stanley, I need to tell you something about our daughter." The words immediately got my attention. "What about Sarah?" Laura swallowed hard. "What I'm about to say is going to hurt." I leaned back in my chair. "Then say it." She took a deep breath. "Sarah isn't your biological daughter." The restaurant noise seemed to disappear. I looked at her without saying a word. She continued before I could respond. 15 years ago, during our first year of marriage, I made a mistake. I saw someone from my past. His name is Anthony. I didn't interrupt. He came back into my life for a short time. I got pregnant. I never knew for sure who Sarah's father was. I stared at her. "And now you're telling me because?" Laura looked down. "Anthony found me online 6 months ago. At first, he just wanted to talk. Then he started pushing for more. He said Sarah deserved to know who her real father was. He told me if I didn't tell you myself, he would. He's been threatening to blow up our lives if I didn't cooperate." I watched her carefully. She sounded rehearsed, not emotional, prepared. That bothered me more than the story itself. "So, this man suddenly appears after 15 years?" I asked. "Yes. And now he wants to play father?" She nodded. Something didn't fit. Before I could ask another question, Laura's phone lit up beside her plate. Then it lit up again. And again. I looked at the screen. Laura's hand shot toward it immediately, too quickly. That's when my suspicion turned into certainty. Something was very wrong. I looked at Laura's phone. She looked at me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she grabbed for it. I was faster. I picked it up and pulled it out of her reach. "Stanley, give it back." "No!" Her face went pale. That told me everything I needed to know. If Anthony was really blackmailing her, she would have wanted me to see the messages. Instead, she looked terrified. I unlocked the screen. Laura stood up from her chair. "Please don't do this." I ignored her. The latest message was already open. I expected threats, demands, something about exposing secrets. Instead, I found something else. The first message read, "Just stay calm. Once he believes Sarah isn't his, everything else becomes easy." I read it twice. Then I kept scrolling. Every message made the situation worse. There were hotel reservations, vacation plans, conversations about moving in together. One message said, 15 years and he never suspected a thing. Another said, "The best part is, he'll walk away on his own. No custody fight, no drama." I slowly lowered the phone. Laura looked like she wanted the floor to open beneath her. "Anthony isn't blackmailing you," I said. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "You're sleeping with him, Stanley? And this story about Sarah isn't true. It's complicated." "No," I said firmly. "It's actually very simple." People at nearby tables had started noticing. I didn't care. I looked directly at her. "You wanted me to think Sarah wasn't mine." Laura shook her head. "Stanley, listen to me." I cut her off. "So I leave." Tears filled her eyes. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I held up the phone. "You two planned this." She sat back down, defeated. I continued scrolling. The messages got worse. They laughed about me, discussed my routines, talked about what I'd do after hearing the lie. According to them, I'd be heartbroken, move out quietly, and eventually disappear from Sarah's life. They had planned my reaction like I was a character in a movie. What they didn't plan for was me reading the script. I pulled out my phone. Laura's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Protecting myself." I took photos of every message I could find, every conversation, every photo, every piece of their plan. When I finished, I set her phone back on the table. Laura looked at me desperately. "Please let me explain." "Go ahead." She hesitated. That hesitation told me there wasn't a good explanation. Finally, she whispered, "I made a mistake." I laughed once, a short, cold laugh. "No, the affair was a mistake." I pointed at the phone. "This was a plan." Her eyes dropped. I stood up. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a small digital recorder. The red light was still blinking. Laura's eyes widened. I nodded. From the moment I sat down, she stared at the recorder. For the first time all night, I saw genuine panic on her face. "You recorded this?" "Every word." Her face lost what little color it had left. "Stanley, please, let's talk somewhere private." "We already did." I picked up my jacket and reached for the bill. She grabbed my wrist. For years, that might have worked. Not tonight. I gently removed her hand. "You should stop making bad decisions, Laura." Then I paid for my meal and walked out. I didn't wait for her. I didn't look back. The moment I got into my truck, I started working. Not tomorrow, not next week. Right then. First, I backed up the recording to cloud storage. Then I emailed myself copies. After that, I saved screenshots of every message I had photographed from Laura's phone. Evidence first, emotions later. By the time I checked into a hotel, it was almost midnight. I spent the next 2 hours researching family law attorneys. At 1:30 in the morning, I sent emails to 4 of them. I attached the recording, the screenshots, and a summary of everything that had happened. Then I went to sleep. At 7 a.m., my phone rang. The caller was Benjamin Ross, one of the attorneys. "Mr. Stanley, I've reviewed what you sent." "And?" There was a pause. "If everything is authentic, your wife has put herself in a very dangerous legal position." That was all I needed to hear. We scheduled a meeting for that morning. Benjamin's office was downtown. After listening to the recording and reviewing the messages himself, he leaned back in his chair. "Have you spoken to your daughter yet?" "No." "Good." He nodded. "Keep it that way for now." Then he slid a business card across the desk. "A DNA testing clinic." I looked at him. "You think I should do it?" "I think we remove every possible question before court does." "Fair enough." Before I left his office, Benjamin helped me arrange a DNA test. I paid extra for expedited results. I wanted answers in 72 hours, not a week. Not long after, Laura started calling. I let it ring. She called again and again. Then came the text messages. Long apologies, excuses, promises. I didn't answer a single one. That evening, Benjamin called. "I've started preparing paperwork." "For what?" "Emergency custody, if the DNA confirms what we expect." I looked out the hotel window. "Good." There was a short silence. Then Benjamin asked, "What do you think is really going on here?" I thought about Anthony. The messages, the plan, the lies. Then I answered, "I think they believed I would quit." I ended the call. What neither of them understood was simple. I wasn't going anywhere. Now all I needed was the proof. The DNA results arrived 3 days later. I was sitting in my hotel room when the email notification appeared. I opened it immediately. One page, one line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. I stared at it for a few seconds. Not because I was surprised, because now I had proof. Sarah was my daughter. She always had been. Laura's entire story had been a lie. I forwarded the report to Benjamin. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone rang. "That's exactly what we needed," he said. "What happens now?" "Now we move." By noon, paperwork had been filed. By afternoon, Laura had been served. And that's when things got even more interesting. Around 6 that evening, Benjamin called again. His tone was different. Something came up. "What kind of something?" "A school administrator contacted us after hearing about the custody filing." That got my attention. "Go on." "Apparently Anthony has been showing up at Sarah's school." I sat up straight. "What?" "He signed in as a family friend twice in the last month." My jaw tightened. "What was he doing there?" "According to staff, he attended one school event and tried introducing himself to a teacher as someone important in Sarah's life." I felt anger rising, but I kept my voice steady. "Did he ever speak to Sarah?" "No evidence of that." That was the only good news. Benjamin continued. "Technically, he didn't break any laws, but it helps establish intent." Intent. That word mattered. Anthony wasn't some old boyfriend who suddenly wanted answers. He was already trying to insert himself into my daughter's life, before I even knew he existed. The next morning, Laura showed up at the hotel. I saw her through the lobby window. I walked outside. She looked exhausted. "Stanley, please." "What?" Her eyes filled with tears. "You filed for custody." "Yes." "You didn't even talk to me first." I almost laughed. You planned to convince me Sarah wasn't my daughter. That's not what happened. I took one step closer. Then tell me exactly what happened. She couldn't, because the truth sounded worse than the lie. I never wanted this to go so far, she finally whispered. I nodded. But it did. Then I handed her a copy of the DNA results. She looked down. The color drained from her face. For a long moment, she said nothing. Finally, she looked back up. You already knew? No, I said. Now I know. I turned and walked back toward the hotel entrance. Behind me, I heard her call my name. I kept walking. A few hours later, Benjamin called again. The judge had agreed to hear our emergency custody request. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. For the first time since that dinner, Laura wasn't controlling the situation anymore. Now she was reacting to mine. The emergency hearing took place 8 days later. Laura arrived with an attorney. Anthony was there too. It was the first time I had ever seen him in person. 15 years of marriage had nearly been destroyed because of that man. Honestly, he looked smaller than I expected. Not physically, just smaller. The kind of person who talked big when nobody challenged him. Judge Evelyn Brooks entered the courtroom and got straight to business. Benjamin stood first. He presented the timeline carefully. No drama, just facts. The recording from the restaurant was played. The courtroom became very quiet. Laura sat motionless. Anthony stared at the table. Then Benjamin submitted the messages. The judge spent several minutes reading them. Her expression changed with every page. Finally, she looked up. Mrs. Laura Mitchell, is there any dispute that these messages are authentic? Laura's attorney spoke quietly with her, then stood. No, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Then she looked directly at Laura. You knowingly told your husband that his daughter was not biologically his. Laura swallowed. Yes. And at the time you said that, you had no evidence supporting the claim. Laura's voice was barely audible. No. The judge's eyes narrowed. So you deliberately attempted to make a father question his relationship with his child. Nobody spoke. The silence said enough. Then the judge turned toward Anthony. Mr. Anthony Walker, these messages suggest you expected Mr. Stanley Mitchell to voluntarily leave his daughter's life. Anthony shifted uncomfortably. That's not what I meant. Judge Brooks held up one of the printed messages. It appears to be exactly what you meant. Even Anthony's lawyer had no response. The momentum in the room had completely changed. Laura wasn't defending herself anymore. She was surviving. Then came the decision. Judge Brooks folded her hands. Based on the evidence presented, I have serious concerns regarding manipulation directed toward both Mr. Mitchell and the minor child. She paused. I'm granting temporary primary custody to Mr. Stanley Mitchell. Laura's eyes immediately filled with tears. The judge continued. Mrs. Mitchell will receive supervised visitation pending further evaluation. Then she looked at Anthony. And Mr. Walker is prohibited from any contact with the minor until further order of this court. Anthony looked stunned. I didn't. The evidence had spoken for itself. As the hearing ended, Laura turned toward me. Stanley, please. I met her eyes. For a moment, she looked exactly like she had at the restaurant. The difference was simple. Back then, she thought she had all the cards. Now she knew she didn't. What none of us realized was that an even bigger problem was waiting. Sarah had started asking questions, and she was about to learn more than anyone intended. A few days after the hearing, Sarah stopped me in the kitchen before school. She was 15, smart enough to notice when adults were hiding things. Dad, what's really happening? I looked at her. What do you mean? She crossed her arms. I mean, Mom barely comes around. You're talking to lawyers. People at school are acting weird. She wasn't a little kid anymore. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the conversation. I chose my words carefully. Your mother made some decisions that hurt a lot of people. Sarah stared at me. Did she cheat on you? The question came so directly that I almost smiled. No point lying now, I said. Yes. Her expression hardened immediately. That told me she already suspected it. What else? I hesitated. Not because I didn't know what to say, because once certain things were said, they couldn't be unsaid. Your mother tried to convince me that I wasn't your father. Sarah blinked, then blinked again. What? It wasn't true. She looked completely stunned. But why would she do that? I shook my head. That's something you'll have to ask her. 2 days later, she did. I wasn't there for the conversation, but I heard about it afterward. Laura called me that night. For the first time in weeks, I answered. Sarah hates me. Her voice was shaking. What happened? I tried explaining. And? She said she doesn't understand how a mother could do something like that. I remained silent. Laura started crying. She wouldn't even look at me. I wasn't interested in comforting her. Actions had consequences. Meanwhile, Anthony's life was falling apart too. His wife discovered everything through the court filings. Within a week, she had filed for divorce. Then his employer learned about the situation. Apparently, being involved in a public custody dispute built around deception wasn't good for his career. Funny how that worked. The most surprising part came a few weeks later. Laura tried reaching out to Anthony repeatedly. He stopped answering. The same man who had promised her a future suddenly disappeared when things became difficult. Exactly the kind of person I expected him to be. While all that happened, I stayed focused on Sarah. Therapy, school, routine, stability. Every decision came back to one question. What helps my daughter most? Then, a week before the final custody hearing, Benjamin called. Something happened today. What? He sounded almost impressed. Sarah requested a private meeting with Judge Brooks. I sat quietly for a moment. What does she want to say? Benjamin gave a short laugh. Nobody knows. For the first time in months, even I was curious about what would happen next. The final custody hearing took place 6 weeks later. By then, most of the damage had already been done. Laura's relationship with Sarah was hanging by a thread. Anthony had completely vanished from the picture, and Sarah had made it very clear that she was no longer willing to be treated like a child who didn't understand what was happening. Before the hearing officially began, Judge Brooks met privately with her. Nobody else was allowed in the room. Not me, not Laura, not the attorneys, just the judge and Sarah. The meeting lasted nearly 30 minutes. When Sarah finally came out, she looked calm, confident, like she had already said everything she needed to say. The hearing began shortly afterward. Benjamin presented the final reports from the therapist, school counselor, and custody evaluator. The findings were consistent. Sarah felt safe with me. She trusted me. She wanted stability. Most importantly, she wanted to continue living with me. Then Judge Brooks spoke. I had an opportunity to speak with Sarah this morning. The courtroom became completely silent. The judge looked toward Laura. Your daughter is an intelligent young woman. Laura lowered her eyes. Judge Brooks continued. She expressed deep disappointment regarding the actions that brought this family into court. Laura's shoulders dropped. Then the judge looked at me. She also made one thing very clear. I waited. Stanley is my father. Nothing anyone says will change that. For the first time that day, I felt something hit me. Not relief, not victory, something stronger, validation, because that was all I had ever wanted. The truth. Judge Brooks reviewed her notes one final time. Then she delivered the ruling. Full custody was awarded to me. Laura would continue supervised visitation for the foreseeable future. Any future changes would depend on rebuilding trust with Sarah. The family home would remain with me so Sarah's life could remain stable. The case was over. Outside the courthouse, Laura approached me. She looked exhausted. Months of consequences had caught up with her. Stanley? I stopped. She took a deep breath. I never thought things would end like this. I looked at her for a moment. Neither did I. Then I walked toward my truck. Sarah was already waiting inside. As I climbed into the driver's seat, she looked over at me. Are we done? I started the engine. Yeah, she smiled. Good. And for the first time in a very long time, I smiled back. But the real ending to the story came a year later. A year after that dinner, life looked completely different. Not perfect, just honest. And that was enough. Sarah and I had settled into a routine. We ate dinner together most nights. I adjusted my work schedule so I could be around more. We both continued therapy for a while, not because we were falling apart, but because we wanted to make sure we stayed on solid ground. Little by little, our house stopped feeling like the place where everything had broken. It became home again. One Friday evening, I sat in the auditorium of Sarah's high school. She was performing in a school debate competition. The same girl who had once been caught in the middle of adult lies now stood confidently in front of hundreds of people, speaking without hesitation. I watched from the audience and couldn't help feeling proud. When the event ended, students flooded into the hallway. A few moments later, Sarah spotted me. She walked over carrying her folder under one arm. Well, she asked. You crushed it, she laughed. I knew you'd say that. Because it's true. We headed toward the parking lot together. As we walked, she suddenly stopped. Dad? Yeah? She looked at me for a second. Then she said something I never forgot. You never gave up on me. Simple words, but they carried the weight of everything that had happened. I nodded. That was never an option. Sarah smiled. Then she wrapped her arms around me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. Across town, Laura was living in a small apartment. Her supervised visits had eventually become unsupervised, but the relationship she once had with Sarah was still damaged. Trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. She had learned that the hard way. As for Anthony, I heard he moved to another state after his divorce. I never saw him again. Didn't care to. Some people remove themselves from your life and save you the trouble. That night, Sarah and I stopped for burgers on the way home. Nothing fancy, just a normal evening. The kind of evening I had once taken for granted. As I sat across from my daughter, listening to her talk about school, friends, and future plans, I thought back to that restaurant. The lies, the manipulation, the plan to make me walk away. Laura and Anthony believed they controlled the story. They thought they could decide how it ended. They were wrong, because the moment the truth came out, everything changed. And in the end, the thing they tried hardest to destroy became the one thing they couldn't touch. The bond between a father and his daughter. Thank you for watching.